Okay, Jeff, go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Badnock, and on behalf of the University of Montana Alumni Association and the Community Lecture Series, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the fifth lecture of the 2022 University of Montana Alumni Association Annual Community Lecture Series. This series was established more than 20 years ago as a means to give a spotlight to the many amazing faculty at work researching and lecturing on the university's campuses. The series shares with the community the cutting-edge work in the arts and sciences for which the university is so well known. Like last year, we are mindful of your health and are hosting this year's lectures online via Zoom. We all hope that next year's lectures will be before a live audience. Since this is not a ticketed event this year, the Lecture Series Committee decided to offer the series to the public at no charge. To support this generous offering, the Lecture Series Committee is grateful to acknowledge the support of First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, Kitty Robbins, and an anonymous donation in honor of former University of Montana President George Dennison and his wife Jane as this year's Lecture Series sponsors. If you enjoy these lectures and wish to support them now and in the future, please feel free to visit the University of Montana Alumni Association website and make a donation of your own. As always, these lectures are the result of a lot of work on the part of the Community Lecture Series Committee, made up of Kitty Robbins, Joe Batt, Robert Stubblefield, Chris Comer, and Peggy Kapoor. Jody Moreau of the Alumni Association Office and UM student Lindsay House have provided indispensable support in the organization and production of the series. The committee has chosen for this year's series the theme, Our Environment Matters. From the waters of Montana to the wildfires of the Northwest, this year's lectures will explore human impact on our environmental sustainability and how changes in the environment affect our lives and how we live in the world. This year's series will showcase 6 of University of Montana's finest professors as they share rich and exciting research happening at the University of Montana and beyond. As always, following the lecturer's presentation, there will be an opportunity for members of the audience to ask questions so that our experience can be broadened. To do that, simply click on the chat function on Zoom and submit your question. We will get to as many of these questions as we can, but we have a clear ending point for tonight's event at 8:30. The lecture series has received a media assistance grant from MCAT, now housed in Missoula's wonderful new public library, to record the lectures for later viewing. The lectures are now being cablecast at MCAT on every Tuesday night at 5:30, and then again the following Thursday at 7 p.m. And they will be aired in order, one each week, one on Tuesday and one on Thursday. One of the activities that has for time immemorial most intimately connected us to our environment is hunting. Here in Montana, there is a long tradition of hunters feeding their families during hunting seasons. This is a managed activity supervised by the state of Montana so that hunting has become an integral part of wildlife management. It stands to reason that with human expansion into the environment used by animals, that their populations would be affected as habitat migration routes are altered. Hunters are often the best environmentalists and stewards of game ranges. Tonight, to share her experience as a hunter, is Professor Libby Metcalf, Associate Dean of Undergraduate Affairs, and the Joel Meyer Distinguished Professor of Wildlife Management. Dr. Metcalf received a BA and a BS from Southern Connecticut University, an MS in Recreation, Parks, and Tourism Resources from West Virginia State University, and earned her PhD in Recreation, Parks, and Tourism Management from the Pennsylvania State University. Her area of research and teaching spans a wide swath of outdoor recreation and human activity there. Please join me in welcoming Professor Libby Metcalf.
Thank you. I'm going to start this screen share and see if I can do it the right way. Looks so far that I'm not. I apologize all. Let me. Gosh, of course I practiced this and now I can't do it right. Okay, here we go. Let's see if we got this. Okay, can I get a thumbs up if we see this, Jeff? Just gonna go with
Looks
it.
good, Libby, it looks good.
Thank you. I've been teaching on Zoom for like 2 years and don't know how to do this. So welcome everybody. I'm Libby. It's so good to be here. Today I'm going to talk about hunting. I'm going to talk about women in hunting, and we're going to go down this wonderful journey together. I first want to start by acknowledging the fact that I'm going to share this story today from one particular lens, and that's my lens. It's from my positionality. It's from where I view the world. We're going to talk very much about hunting in North America as it's connected to kind of dominant present day society. What I'm not going to talk about is the deep connection and the roots that Indigenous people have with hunting. And so I share this up front and to start because I think it's a really important piece. I'm standing here on the lands of the Salish and Kalispel people. These folks and many other Indigenous communities have treaty rights with hunting, and they are minimal at best. We know Indigenous groups hunt for sustenance. We know they hunted for cultural connection, and we know they hunted for family. And so that narrative is a limitation that I do not cover tonight. And so I just want to acknowledge that, and I hope that when we leave this conversation that you think about that moment and all the things I've talked about and how we bring that into the narrative moving forward. I'm here tonight talking, and I'm honored to have this privilege. And I want to first thank my students. I think some of them might be on tonight. They are my inspiration. They are the reason I get up each day and come to work. And so if it wasn't for my students, I wouldn't be thinking about these issues the way I think about them. I also want to acknowledge that my little chickens are watching, Charlie Metcalf and William Metcalf. William is my soft, gentle son, and Charlie is my fierce daughter. And I'm so thankful to have them on the call tonight. And then the last people I want to acknowledge are Joel and Patty Meyer. I am the inaugural first Joel Meyer Distinguished Professor of Wildland Management. And Joel and Patty, I thank you for being here. Joel is the reason why University of Montana does experiential education for undergraduate students. His work throughout time, he was a former professor here. He is the reason why our college, the College of Forestry and Conservation, thinks so deeply about the connection between students and the natural environment. And so the other piece of Joel and Patty that I want to acknowledge is their desire to make the natural resources and outdoor environments come to life and be accessible for all people. And so you'll hear those notes throughout my research tonight. Okay, so I'm not going to belabor my what I do too much, but I do want to acknowledge kind of where I've come from because I think it's important for you all to know who I am. I grew up in Connecticut. I didn't grow up in Montana. I'm a first generation college student. I was not going to make it to college on my brains alone. I was not a standardized test taker, so the system was against me. And so I ran my way into college, literally. I was a runner, and I knew if I could run pretty fast that I might be able to get there. And so I went to Southern Connecticut State University, which is directly adjacent to Yale. So when people are like, I go to school in New Haven, I say, so did I. I grew up, my passion for the outdoors started there. It started when I was a little younger and carried me through my time. I moved on to West Virginia University to get a degree in recreation management at the Division of Natural Resources and at WVU. And I had a profound experience, which I'll share with you in a few moments. From there, I moved on to Penn State, where I met my husband, Alex, who's also faculty in the college with me. He is the better Metcalf. You'll see him pop up in a lot of the work that I do as well. But I started this dual degree program where I focused on recreation management and human dimensions of natural resources. And so I largely classify myself as this human dimensions researcher, and I'll explain what that means in a little bit. I currently reside in the Franke College of Forestry and Conservation. I told you I'm the Joel Meyer Distinguished Professor, but I'm also the Senior Associate Dean for Undergraduate Affairs, which means I think about undergraduates all day long. I also sit in the Parks, Tourism, and Recreation Management program, where we have a really intimate, experience-based undergraduate degree. And I also sit on the wildlife biology faculty. And so it's important for you guys to know those things because it emerges throughout my research. And it's important for you to understand what I do. So a lot of times I get people who ask me, well, what the heck is human dimensions? What are you even talking about when you say those words? And so the first and foremost, I like to tell people I'm a scientist. I study people, and I use social science-based examination to look at natural resource phenomenon. And so I do a lot of work on social psychology and a lot of work with community social psychology. And I use that social theory to explain how humans interact with and among the natural resource and how this can ultimately impact management of natural resources. Everything I do is oriented to that applied management action. And so a lot of times people will say to me, well, do you do extension, outreach, or communication? Or they'll say things like, do you do citizen science? No, I do scientific inquiry and examination. I'm an empirical researcher. And so I test hypotheses, I look at research questions, and I try to understand phenomenon. So today we're going to go down this road of women in hunting. And I promise you that I will meander and I will tell too many stories and I will jibber jabber my way through this. And you guys, hopefully it'll be interesting. And I apologize for the tangents I take. It's just who I am. So why study women in hunting? So story number one, here we go. I was so against hunting through most of my life. I was like, this is not my jam. I'm not gonna, I don't condone this. I don't think this is the way I think about the world. And so that was when I was growing up in Connecticut, and I was really into kind of the preservation of our resources. And I was down in West Virginia and I was doing my research, and I was sitting in a diner in a rural part of West Virginia, and it was a day off from school. It was like a holiday, and the holiday was opening day of hunting season. And I'm sitting there at this diner, and I said to the woman next to me, I said, what a crazy holiday to get off, hunting season. And she stopped me and she said, I have to stop you there. I need this day. And I said, well, tell me why. And she was a bus driver. And she said, this is the day I fill my freezer. This is the day I feed my family. If I did not have this day, I would not be able to exist through the winter in West Virginia. And of course I'm oversimplifying this interaction, but it had a profound impact on me. And at that moment, I shifted the way I was thinking about my research. And I knew from there that the PhD I was going to focus on was really going to be geared towards women in hunting. And so that's kind of how I started getting into this topic, was from that experience. And so I'll tell you a couple stories as we go along the way. But I'm going to start, we're going to go way back. We're going to date it back to hunting and conservation from early days. But what we know is that hunting has a long history dating back to Pleistocene periods, meaning that early humans were hunting. They were hunting for survival. They were hunting for safety. And so this idea that hunting is like a new phenomenon or a North American phenomenon is not true. It dates for a very long time. We also know that it predates the US by thousands of years. And so that means it has a deep tie to our indigenous communities and tribal partners, and that deep connection should be examined further. And so when we think about hunting, we can think about some of the challenges that we've seen with hunting over time and why people might think about hunting as not being a positive part of society. And so one of the things that we know from the 1800s is that we didn't treat a lot of species very well. There was a lot of market hunting that was going on in the 1800s. And this was, think about the extirpation of particular species. One example, or one prominent example that I often use, is the example of Buffalo Bill Cody. Buffalo Bill Cody, a Wyoming, Montana kind of icon, one day took 69 bison. And so bison ended up being this turning point for hunting in North America and bison conservation. And there was an ask to stop doing this. This was not the way that we wanted to preserve these wildlife species. And so think about the 1800s, think about the late 1800s in our public land movement. Think about Ulysses S. Grant designating Yellowstone National Park as our first national park. think about all the land grabs, think about some of our conservation and preservation movements. And so we have this rise of the Teddy Roosevelt, Gifford Pinchot, John Muir, Grinnell, all of these older white gentlemen who are considered these grandfathers of conservation. And they did great things. And they said, we need to think about wildlife conservation in a different way. And so Teddy Roosevelt is often the icon that we think about. People will tell you the story of the teddy bear, or they'll tell you how many African species he trophy hunted. But some of the things I like to consider with Teddy is his connection to the wildlife refuge system and kind of preservation of large tracts of land. Fast forward even more to people like Aldo Leopold. We wax poetically about Aldo, and he has some really lovely writings. He's often coined the father of wildlife management, and he has these very elaborate essays about land ethics and interconnectedness of humans and the land. Those folks get the acknowledgement for those stories, and I would probably argue and caution that we might want to think a little deeper about that deep connection of land and wildlife. So fast forward even a little bit more, and we start thinking about this North American model of wildlife conservation. And it's largely the basis for the policies around wildlife. And it's deeply entrenched and connected to the public trust doctrine, which is a legal concept that natural resources are fundamental to society, and as such, we have the responsibility to protect them. And so there's a lot of problems with the North American model that I'll kind of touch on today, and there's a lot of problems with the public trust doctrine. And so there's a lot of researchers here at UM who are thinking about this and thinking about it a little bit differently, and I encourage you to go look at some of their work. So that North American model really focused on this idea that we have these tenets and we need to follow these tenets. And one of those tenets is wildlife should only be killed for legitimate purposes. And under that is listed food, fur, self-defense, and protection of property. And so what this did was say, we got to move away from this kind of market hunting and move more towards this wildlife conservation model. So, let's move this forward. Oh no. Sorry. Okay, there we go. All right. So why do we care about hunting? I get this question a lot about what is the thing? Why do we need it in society? Well, the first reason why is for population management. There are not a lot of good ways to deal with the white-tailed deer issue in Missoula, Montana. So if you're rolling around Higgins and you see a deer walking across the street and you're annoyed by it, you're not alone. Montanans and Missoulians are kind of annoyed by the abundance. So we were 5 valleys, everything's emerging. We have this encroachment of society on our natural resource. And what that does is create this abundance issue. And so hunting is one of those ways to manage that population. So the other one that we often think about with population management is this idea around disease control. If you follow things down in Yellowstone, you will understand that brucellosis is a problem. That's a problem, it's often attributed to bison or buffalo, but it's also, the bigger issue is it's a problem with elk. The other disease we're often seeing is chronic wasting disease. That's was highly prevalent in the Midwest and has now emerged in Montana. And so we're trying to figure out how to manage these wildlife issues with hunting. Hunting is also largely associated with conservation funding. License sales and excise taxes, like the Pittman-Robertson Act, make up about 75% of funding for state agencies. That funding goes towards monitoring and management of wildlife species. One might argue that some of that money should be, or some of that money is overly given to megafauna, so like elk, deer, things of those nature, and should be distributed more equitably, but that's not for tonight. It's also there for habitat and habitat improvements. And that money also goes to education and outreach. And that education and outreach is what I'll focus on tonight a little bit. The last place is advocacy. And so how do we build support for wildlife? How do we build support for conserving our wildlife? And part of that is through this hunting conservation. So what's the problem? Okay, so what's the big problem with hunting and why are you jibber jabbering in our ear about it? So the big thing that I like to talk about is kind of this overall decline in hunting in society. And so this is a graphic that I pulled from Outdoor Life magazine, and it uses the data from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service survey, and it's a survey of hunters, anglers, and wildlife-related activities. And this survey has been going on for numerous years, and it tracks hunting-related trends over time. It's a survey that's done every 5 years. And so I'll talk about those data throughout. And so we're losing hunters, essentially. You can see the number of hunters that have shifted. Just visually looking at these blocks, you can see that it's different and that it has changed. And so as we see a decrease in hunters, we know we're going to see a decrease in wildlife conservation dollars. And so that's the kind of the basic relationship that we're working on here. One way that we measure this is through license holders. So when you go to hunt in Montana or any state, you have to buy a hunting license. And so this is a graphic of that from 1960 to 2016, and you can see this kind of license change over time. North Dakota winning the game with the most increase in hunters per capita, Vermont losing the game. And so you can kind of see that the change, the dramatic shift over license holders over time. This is another way to look at it. This is just simply a state picture of the state, or not the state, the country. And you can see that, again, the green is where we're increasing in hunters and the yellow and brown is where we're decreasing. And so this becomes problematic, right? We're losing all these hunters. We have a problem here. We're losing money for conservation. The other thing we can note is that hunters are relatively staying the same age. And so this is just a quick graphic of the state of Arizona and hunters by age. And what we see is that the hunters that were hunting in 1992 are essentially the same men who were hunting in 2012. And so what we know is that we're not just decreasing hunters, but our hunters are like the same folks. We're not recruiting new hunters into the activity. And so it becomes highly problematic as we think about conservation funding and just generally how we manage wildlife species. So wildlife agencies and NGOs have been aware of this problem for years, like a lot of years. It's been a slow train coming at them from the 90s. And wildlife agencies have done kind of nothing to deal with it. I know I'm being incredibly harsh right now, but I get to be on my soapbox today. And so this has been a problem for years. And so they're like, agencies are like, a program. And so they do what we call these feel-good programs. The feel-good programs to me are like, we're gonna do a program for kids. And that's how we're gonna get new hunters. And so they go to their hunting pool and they like send a note to their license holders who all happen to be men and all happen to be hunters. And they said, how about you have your kids come, your sons come to this program and we'll turn them into hunters. And dad's like this and that's how it progresses. Those feel-good programs don't actually fix the problem. It doesn't actually get at the issue, is that we fundamentally need to shift and alter how we think about hunting as a cultural activity in society. And so that's where I kind of spend a lot of my time. It's like we have been doing the same thing over and over and over again, and it needs to fundamentally shift and change. The other problem with these programs is that they largely have not collected any data on them. They've just existed in space, and they're like, and agencies are like, yeah, we've done it. It's great. We did 6 programs. We had 32 kids, and we win because of that. And so that's another component of it, is that we're not actually collecting data. And as a an empirical researcher, I like to have that data. More recently, we have this new movement. It's called R3. It's called recruitment. So how do we get more people into the activity? Retention, how do we keep them in the activity? And reactivation, how do we get the folks who used to do the activity back in the activity? There's a lot of challenges with the R3 movement that I can describe, and I probably will describe over time, but that's for another day as well, and I'll kind of hit on some of them tonight. So I started thinking about this, and I started to think about, well, if these feel-good programs aren't working, if agencies aren't really looking at this, like what is really actually happening in this data? And so this is some data from the National Sporting Goods Association. And this is from 2016. And they really looked at shooting sports. And so these are their big takeaways in the last 10 years. And you can see that there's a dramatic increase in the number of women or females participating in these shooting-related sports. In 2016, of the 11.5 million people who hunted, 1.1 million of them were female, representing about 8% of the population. We know from a lot of the data that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service collected that that's on a rise. And so we have this large problem with a decline in hunting population, and there's one group that's increasing dramatically and by big percentage points, and that is women. And so you might ask yourself, well, what are agencies really doing to engage women in hunting? And so that's where I kind of start my research. And it turns out we have some programs that are wonderful. Becoming an Outdoors Woman, if you've ever heard of it, it's a really great program. And I actually think it's one of the success stories of agencies. But largely, agencies don't want to tackle this issue. When I started thinking about this issue in 2005, I brought these ideas to agency after agency, to funder after funder, who said, we don't care. Why would we care about women? Women will never hunt. They are gatherers. Men are hunters. And this narrative persists today, sadly. It's changing. And so part of the work I like to do is think about that changing narrative and how do we get women into hunting? Why do we want women in hunting? And I'll talk about some of those reasons later on. And so we see PhDs all over the world attributing hunting to males, to men, to boys. And so this quote is my favorite. I always use it. As an inherited instinct, hunting is deeply rooted in human nature. Around the world in all cultures, the urge to hunt awakens in boys. And so in the writings and literature and all of these kind of dominant narratives, hunting is associated with boys and men. And so that's so let's look a little deeper. Let's look a little deeper into the anthropology and see where this started. And so back in 1966, there was a big anthropology conference. It was called Man the Hunter. That was literally the title of the conference. And the idea behind it was these anthropologists got together. They wanted to explore ancient hominids as hunters. They described these hunters as aggressive, masculine, shaping manliness. They encouraged hunting as a way that it shaped the characteristics that fundamentally make us human: our intelligence, our ability to walk upright, and our social abilities. However, at that conference, there was this researcher named Sally Linton, and she said that those early theories of evolution had a male bias towards them. They fundamentally excluded women from the narrative, and that was just false. Okay, so many of the studies that Sally described did not actually categorize or describe females' experiences. And so that was some of the work that her and her colleagues went back to do. They started in on this idea of sociobiology. They tried to understand women as gatherers and food preparers and other divisions of labor. They described women in families. They described females' immobility to deal with hunting because of infants and childcare. They described males' ability to travel further for long game or for large game. But they also rejected some basic tenets as well. And so several studies emerged where that division of labor was not fully supported. And it also rejected some of the early ideas of the reproductive responsibilities that affect females' ability to hunt. And so often we get to this place, and as a mother, I'm very attuned to this, that if you're pregnant, you're essentially just like not able to do anything. And while I was pregnant, I was not able to do a lot of things. I still hunted. In fact, I often tell my students the stories of me going hunting with my other girlfriend who was also pregnant. And the fact that we would cover a half mile and get tired and sit. Or we talk about going to the shooting range and having to cover our bellies up with these big pillows, so we didn't have any impact from the rifles that we were shooting. And so it's not unreasonable to think that pregnant women could hunt. In fact, I am one of those pregnant women that did hunt. And the fact that you're a mother means that you can't hunt. And I have these very distinct memories of driving up by Garnett Ghost Town, those of you who know it, to go hunting for mule deer, and sitting in my truck and pumping in the trunk, and having to go back to my truck to make sure I could get the milk out. And so it's not an insurmountable obstacle. In fact, it was just a way of how it shaped how we hunted that season. So let's fast forward now to present day. And I'm going to share a quick little story of my homegirl, WMP6, who has fundamentally changed the narrative around women and who they were and who they were not. And so if you know WMP6 or Individual 6, you know what I'm talking about. This study emerged in 2020 in the depths of COVID, when I was thinking about like how I was no longer a useful human being. This study came out and it like hit me, and I was like, this is the greatest study I've read in a long time. And so this article was in Science Advances in 2020, and it's been featured in National Geographic, so please, I encourage you to Google it when you're done. And they found this Individual 6 in the Andes Mountain, and she was found with 24 stone artifacts that were typical for hunting. It was part of this integrated toolkit in a leather bag, and it was found at her burial site. And so what these researchers said was it challenged how we thought about big game hunting. And they said this gendered behavioral pattern is an ancestral one, stemming from life history traits related to pregnancy and childcare, which constrain female subsistence opportunities. And Haas et al. Said, no, that's not true. WMP6 has changed that. And so what they did is they found this one woman, this Individual 6, and then they said, we must have missed things. And so they went back into data, and they found 429 individuals from 107 sites that were associated with big game hunting. And so the data had been there all along. We just missed the data. And so we can look to other ethnographic and anthropologic research to understand this at a deeper level. We know that small-scale societies are engaged in hunting in a lot of different ways, from the past to present day. We know that women provide supportive roles in hunting by encouraging hunts through verbal and nonverbal cues to their partners. They perform rituals after successful hunts. They provide information for successful hunts. They butcher, they carry meat. And there's examples all over. They're from Cameroon to the Congo to Tanzania to Alaska. And so there's a big supportive role that we know happens with hunting in women. But what we also know is that women are hunters, and they engage in direct hunting activities. And one of the things that we know is that, and I'll talk about this, is female hunters are fundamentally different types of hunters than males. They often focus on communal hunting trips. And when they do hunt independently, it's often with smaller game. And some of those, there's examples of the Peruvian Amazonian groups, Paraguay, Congo Basin, Australian Aboriginals. They take part in chases, they strike animals, they haul game, they preserve meat, they hunt with dogs, they carry nursing infants with them. Geez, they do so much. And so it's really just the theme that I know. And so we know that women hunt overall at a lower participation rate, but we also know they use different techniques. And so a lot of women who hunt in these societies actually hunt with nets. They pursue that smaller game, they hunt closer to home, and they often hunt in groups with shorter trips. And so a lot of this anthropology research, what it did is they challenged our narrative, they challenged our viewpoint that women are not just gatherers. Yeah, women gather, but women also hunt, and men also gather. And so that narrative is really important to establish, that historical narrative that women are not gatherers, that they're also part of this narrative shaping hunting in society. And so let's fast forward to kind of what the 90s. What a fun time the 90s were. I call this my vintage hunting research, which is why I use vintage pictures to depict it because it's so outdated. So some of the early research around women in hunting out of the wildlife management literature was just preposterous, which is so I describe it to you here because I want to make the point that we studied this from a really poor place, and we didn't actually study the issue, and that's been causing this problem to perpetuate over time. And so Adams and Steen in 97 that said that hunting with husbands was the primary motivation for females. Oh God, I can just unpack that one a bunch. I love hunting with my husband. I love hunting with my girlfriends even more. My husband gets mad at me because I talk too much while I hunt. My husband also does not appreciate the things that I bring to hunting camp. So goat cheese and wine. I like to develop elaborate dinners for hunting. I like to sit around and connect with girlfriends. For me, there's a huge social element that happens when I hunt. And it's not to say that isn't the same for men. It in fact is, but there are some differences, and I'm not hunting just to hunt for my husband. And that you will find with a lot of the women who hunt. It also suggests that females tend to be less committed than males to hunting. And so Mark McFarlane et al. Wrote this in an article. And so I'll talk about that commitment. And so what that article in particular didn't do was understand the leisure landscape of women and the changes that women have to go through that are far different than our male counterparts. We also know that there's been some studies to document how much money women spend, how many days they spend afield. And so Duda's work said that women drop in and out of hunting. And again, I would argue that these studies have not actually followed the discourse around women's leisure experiences. And so I'm going to take a slight little turn, and we're going to talk about women's leisure for a hot minute, because I think it's really important. Okay, so women's leisure experiences are really important to understand. We spend a lot of time comparing males and females, and that's okay, but we also just need to understand men as a group and women as a group. We know that women have less and lower quality leisure because of their total workload is higher, and they have more responsibility for caring for others. This is where childcare and the child rearing years become critical. When you look at women across their time, between 25 and 45, their leisure participation goes down dramatically. I know this research really well, and I am still surprised by how few days afield I spend hunting. Last year, I hunted 2 days. I went out with my girlfriend for 2 days. My partner provides a lot of support for me to go hunting. He says, go and do it, but I still have just a different responsibility and care than he might. And so leisure scholars have spent a lot of time to demonstrate the ways at which gender uniquely constrain men and women differently. And so those gender comparisons are really critical in understanding why women might be hunting less. It's not because they don't want to, it's not because they're not trying, it's because their leisure experiences are fundamentally different. So what does that mean for hunting? Are we really able to understand this narrative around women in hunting? So that's where I come in, is trying to figure out what that narrative is and how I might change that narrative. And so one of the ways, one of the ways that we can do this is by thinking a little bit about how we think about women in hunting in present day. And so this slide is just to kind of tell you some of the things that are challenging for women in hunting, and to talk about some of the cool things that are existing. And so we're kind of in this unique phase where women have been pressing and pushing the gender norms associated with the activity. And there's a lot of great examples of these really profound women doing this. But there's still a grouping or a whole background of folks that have not caught up with this. And so I was sitting with my students one day, and another colleague, and I was telling them about the shrink and pink phenomenon. If you don't know what Shrink and Pink is, it's essentially what we do for women in outdoor activities, is we take men's clothes and we shrink them down and we make them pink in the hope that women will buy those things. I like pink, I'll wear pink, but it doesn't mean I always want to be in pink. And so we have some of these challenges around just equipment and gear that women have, and that's kind of preventing us from really moving beyond some of this. There's a lot of great outdoor industries, though, that are working to fix this. We also have the babification in hunting, and so there's been a lot of research out there to actually examine popular media sources and how women are portrayed in hunting in those popular sources. One of the biggest culprits is Field and Stream magazine, where there's been documentation after documentation that when women are featured in Field and Stream magazine, they're always in a more submissive pose, and there's very few of them in that magazine. And so we have this kind of challenge of how do we actually showcase women in this activity. And that further is amplified by the social media culture. And so how do the women of Instagram change this narrative as well? One of the things I want to note at this moment is that I believe that women can hunt in any way they want to hunt. They can look in any way they want to look. If they want to wear makeup during their hunts, I am on board. If they want to look beautiful for a hunt, if they want to just throw on some old clothes. And so I support women figuring out how to hunt the way that they feel most comfortable. And I want society to also do that. Okay, more soapboxes for Libby. Okay, so let's talk about my research. So let's get into the things that are really cool, in my opinion. Okay, so what did I do? So let's, like Libby of like 2008, no game management agency actually wanted to talk to me about women in hunting, which was fine. And so I had to sneak it in. We were doing a study for Oregon on some of their hunter recruitment and retention efforts. And I literally snuck in a bunch of questions about women in hunting. We kind of did it quietly, and they were okay in the end, but it was something that I went to them early on and they did not want to do. And so we had to oversample female license holders because only 8 to 11% of license holders were actually women. We had to make sure that we got a large enough sample to actually look at women. And so we gathered about 392 responses from a survey that we sent out. And so the primary way at which I collect data is through quantitative surveys. And so think about a survey being like an attitudinal scale. And so when you go to like a Chili's or an Applebee's or some type of restaurant and you fill out, please rate your satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 5, and you like rate a 5, that's a Likert type scale. And those are kind of the measures that I use to get at attitudes, values, and beliefs around these activities. And I'm happy to go into that deeper if folks have questions about it. And so what I did is I wanted to look at a few measures. I wanted to look at the reason, the motivation around women in hunting, what were the benefits that they were hoping to see, what was driving them to engage. But I also wanted to look at the ways in which women were constrained to hunt. I really wanted to understand what was standing in their way to actually achieve their goal. And then I wanted to understand how people overcome that hunting constraint as well. The last piece that we really focused on was this idea of self-efficacy. And I'm going to show you some more recent work that my grad student Ada has been focused on in a minute. But what we started to understand is that women were motivated by kind of 4 big activities. They were enthusiastic. I call it the all-around enthusiast group. So when I looked at motivations, some women just were really enthusiastic about hunting. Some women are just in the purple category, which is the less engaged. Some women hunted for nature or sport, but overwhelmingly, many of our women were family-oriented hunters. These women often stated things like, I hunt for my family. I hunt to spend time with my family. I hunt to bring meat back to my family. And they rated those motivations higher than our male counterparts, suggesting that women tended to have more family-oriented reasons for hunting. And so this corroborated my theory of my early days in West Virginia, where I was sitting at the diner and my friend there told me that she hunted to feed her family. So when we look at that family-oriented group, I really wanted to understand what was preventing them from hunting more. There's a lot of reasons. And so we often hear these top reasons come out a lot when people say they can't hunt enough. They'll cite things like lack of game or inadequate hunting areas or sites being too crowded or complex rules and regulations. And I'll get back to some of these as we continue on. But they also noted that family responsibilities and lack of time always came out on top. And we see these constraints emerging across a variety of different leisure activities. And so this was not a unique finding for us. We went a little deeper into this research, and we really wanted to understand what were the different self-efficacy that women had. And so this is a recent analysis of my data. So I am very fortunate to have a cadre of graduate students, all women, who work with me. And I have one student, Ada Smith, who is she's phenomenal. And she decided one day that she wanted to look at my dissertation data. Anyone who's a researcher in this room right now knows that your dissertation data is like maybe not your best work. And so I have been mortified that Ada has been digging through my dissertation data. And she'll say things to me like, why did you measure it this way? And I'll say to her, I have no idea. That was 15 years ago. And so it's been really fun to work with Ada on this and a couple other graduate students to kind of realize some of the cool data that existed that I just haven't had the time to actually reproduce. And so what we did is we looked at my measures around self-efficacy. And so self-efficacy is this idea of confidence. We often hear self-efficacy associated with education, with personal achievement, but essentially what it says is if you have you need to have confidence in order to progress through your leisure activities. And so self-efficacy, this idea of self-efficacy in theory was started by this fellow named Bandura, and he has a very clear set of measures. And so I took his scale and I adapted it to connect with hunting. And so there were two kind of places where we thought about self-efficacy: skills-based efficacy. So am I confident in the skills that I have? And then support-based efficacy. We know that social support is a critical component of hunting, and I'll come back to that point. And so I had these skill-based and support-based measures. And what we found is we connected it with years of experience. And we found that as women's years of hunting increased, their confidence scores also increased. Now, there's a lot of flaws in this data. For example, these women are already women who have bought a license, and so they might not, they might already have overcome a lot of the constraints that they have. They might already have an increased level of efficacy. But the basic relationship is one that's really unique. And it's this idea that as you build time in the sport, your confidence increases, and it increases dramatically. And so it's important to note that. And so what we did is we took this idea that confidence is needed and we teased it apart to understand skills and support. And so some of the main kind of recommendations out of that research emerged from some of the work, and this is kind of Ada, and so I want to give Ada credit here. And she said to improve skill-based efficacy, you really need to focus on some of those technical requirements of hunting. How do I haul game? How do I actually deal with my firearms? How do I overcome the fear of hunting alone in the woods? One of the biggest things that we hear in our research is that women and any new hunter are really quite fearful of actually, what do I do if I actually shoot or take an animal? What happens? This is the number one thing I think about when I go hunting alone. I call my friends and I say, what do I do if I actually shoot an elk today? And we come up with a little plan because it's that nerve-wracking. We also know to increase that skill-based efficacy that we might need to start thinking about how do we create positive self-statements around it. One of those things is I am confident I can do this. And so there's a narrative that goes along with that as well. We also need to give women and others access and success during training. And so it's not enough just to take somebody to the range for one day to help them with their firearm. We have to help them be successful in the field each and every day, and that takes time. When we think about support-based efficacy, we also need to think about kind of what that positive feedback is for women in hunting. How do we provide that feedback? How do we encourage women to go out and do it for a second day? We also need to think about acceptance and belonging. This is a big one. I often say I've been hunting. I started bird hunting with my partner in Pennsylvania, but I didn't get into big game hunting until I got to Montana. And I still often say to people, I'm a novice hunter, I'm a beginner hunter. I've been hunting for 7 years. I've harvested plenty of animals, but I still don't feel like I fully belong or am accepted as a hunter. And so there's a piece of that we really need to focus on. And then the last thing is providing representation of women in media. And so not just assuming this is a male-dominated activity, but actually showing how women are portrayed in media. Okay, so one of the articles, a bit major article, this is Larson et al., is how do we change the social habitat for hunting? And this is where I'm gonna move into some of the more recent research I've been working on around college-age students. So the first one is, we know that there's a bunch of ways, there's this kind of nested model of how we create a habitat for hunting. And it starts at the individual, it starts with that self-efficacy, but then it moves on to this idea of family networks and mentors and socialization into hunting. And I'm going to talk and spend some time on that mentors and also that community support network. We know that communication to non-hunting audiences is critical, and that clubs and organizations have a very strong connection with that. And so one of the ways at which we do that is to really focus on college-age students. And so this is kind of a new area of research that I've been focused on with 22 colleagues across the nation. We had this, to my knowledge, it's one of our first grants that really focused on, I think, meaningful recruitment or retention of hunters. And it was emphasized to really focus on the college-age student. And now you can see all my worlds kind of interacting with each other. College students, undergrads, hunting, women, it all emerges in this study. And so this multi-year study collected data from over 1,700 college-age students across these institutions. University of Montana was one of those institutions, so some of our students are part of this. We found that 26% of students were active hunters, and only 7% reported having no social support for hunting, which is pretty good. But what was more interesting to us was not the active hunters, but rather the potential hunters. And we wanted to understand the reasons why people were potentially interested in this activity. A couple of things emerged for us. Ethically and locally sourced food. And so we hear this, there's a big local food movement. This idea of field to table has gained popularity. We hear students saying, I want to be able to harvest my own food. And so the food movement and the local food movement is part of this narrative. We also know that these college-age students understand conservation and hunting, or hunting as a conservation tool. They see it as being a useful tool. And then the last part is for social reasons. And so college-age students and those potential hunters are really digging into that social connection as hunting exists. And so we've taken these results and so this is my plug for things we're doing at UM. We're thinking about this really deeply here at the University of Montana. We're thinking about how do we build this connection for students? And so I've been working with Josh Millspaugh, who's the Boone and Crockett Chair on campus. And we've been offering this course in the fall that we're calling Wild Sustenance. And it's supported by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and also the Boone and Crockett Club. And what we're doing is we're providing this introduction to hunting for students. And our goal is not to create new hunters. Our goal is to get students comfortable with hunting. And so we have this fall course, and the capping experience for the fall course is that we ship all the students out to the Boone and Crockett Ranch out on the Rocky Mountain front. And we have a weekend together where we immerse ourselves in hunting. We start with ethical hunting. We start with why hunt? What does ethical hunting mean for you? I talk a lot about gender. I bring in my gender research. I bring in some of the ideas around reducing those hunting constraints and barriers. We have a local chef come out with us to provide and prepare wild game for the students, which is a real highlight for me as a mom who doesn't want to cook. And then the students get to try different wild game. They get to sample different meats. We also give them opportunity to butcher and field dress animals as well. We also teach them different field skills. And so we go out to the range. And one of our favorite stories is to kind of, some of the most obvious things I know from my research, I often forget when I'm doing my research. We were out there and I'm watching Josh provide a demonstration of clay pigeon shooting. And so we're practicing on shotguns. And every male student immediately jumped up and started engaging with the activity. And all the women students hung back. And I said, Josh, we're stopping and and I call it Women's League. I said, we're getting Women's League started. And so I moved all the men out and I brought all the women in and we provided this safe space for women to be who they needed to be and learn those activities. And so one of the things I often think about from some of my early work throughout my undergrad and through grad school is that women need certain spaces, men need certain spaces to do the activity the way they need to do it. Doesn't mean we can't come back as two genders or in relationships, but we need to provide that space for those people. And then the last part about this program that we have is just building relationships with one another. Making men, women from all walks of life feel comfortable connecting with somebody in the class to think about it. So, okay, I really did jibber jabber long. Okay, so I promised. Okay, so I'm not quite done yet. I gotta conclude in some way. And so I guess in conclusion, so the things that I think about. So for me, if we're gonna have wildlife conservation happen the way it currently does, through license sales, through outdoor taxes, then we need to fundamentally shift how we think about people in this activity. And the group I'm most interested in is thinking about how we think about women and college-age students as part of that narrative. And if we don't do that, we're going to be in a world of hurt in society. We're going to not have funding for conservation. We're not going to have connection to this identity that dates to prehistoric time. And so for me, it's really a call to action. And it's been really fascinating to watch this story emerge over the last decade and starting to see where it's picked up. And so if you just start spending some time on Google and thinking about women in hunting or female hunters, you'll start to notice more popular articles coming up. I was recently asked to give some comment to an outdoor magazine article about women in hunting, and I occasionally get calls about it. And so I'm starting to see the ship slowly turn towards understanding why women hunt. And I don't know, it's really fascinating. And so with that, I will stop talking and I will open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Libby. Ooh. Oh, I'm here. Here I am. Thank you. That was really interesting. It's not a subject that obviously I know a lot about. I have 4 sisters and none of them are hunters. But one of the observations that I was going to make, because you made me think of it, is quite often in the Missoulian, the Dead Tree edition of the Missoulian, they show pictures of young hunters, you know, having got their first antelope, got their first deer. And I remember it was probably a couple of years ago that I noticed that the hunter was a young woman, maybe 12, 13 years old. And now it seems to me it's like every third one that they show is a young woman, older girl hunter. And I think that's probably a testimony that things are changing. They are changing. One of the things that, and I'm not a hunter, but I have a lot of friends who are hunters. And one of the things that occurs to me is that over time, certainly my lifetime, the men hunters that I'm familiar with all had mentors that they went out and, you know, you always waited till you were old enough to go out with your dad and your brothers or whatever to go hunting, your first hunt. And it was all of the ritual and all of the custom and all of the, you know, now you're big enough, and if you're going to go with us, you have to be and do what we say, blah, blah, blah. And it seems to me that in the course of making hunting more accessible to women, there needs to be more women mentors. And can you talk a little bit about that? You talk about going hunting with your women friends. Who are your mentors, and how do women hunters get women mentors who are hunters?
That is a great question, because you're 100% right. And from what you can read in the research, the best mentors are the ones that can be similar to you, right? So we have a lot of men who want to mentor folks in hunting. It doesn't always work for women. I feel most comfortable going out with other women, and I know a lot of my students feel the same way. We are very lucky at UM and in our community here in Missoula to actually have a big group of female hunters. And so we have actually a club on campus. So one of our clubs is Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. My other student, Madeline Damon, who is phenomenal, she is one of my greatest women hunter mentors that I've seen on this campus. And so her and her cadre of friends take it upon themselves to actually work with women in this way. And there's a lot of organizations that also do it. And so I see in the chat, one person brought up Becoming an Outdoors Woman. That's a great place to think about female hunter mentors. There's Artemis, which is a group that works with women hunters. And so I think it's one of those places that is nascent that needs to be developed into a more robust mentorship network.
Okay, well, I'm not going to put you on the spot because you told us that she was watching, but are you going to mentor your daughter when she's ready to become a hunter? I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're on the spot.
I am certain I will mentor both my children into hunting, and I'm certain my husband will also mentor them.
Okay, good. Well, that's a good form of parenting.
Yeah.
From one of the viewers, Linda, she asked a question: do women feel the same pressure to be successful at hunting that men do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually want to. I like that question because do we know that? So I guess I start with: do we know men feel the pressure to hunt? My guess is that there is a pressure there. And it depends on where and how you hunt. And so I want to acknowledge that Montana is a bit of a different hunting atmosphere than other states in the United States, because we have this 6-week period to rifle hunt. Other states are often very short periods of time, and so that I feel like that pressure feels stronger in some of those states with only 2-week hunting periods. And so I think there is a pressure there, but I'm not certain it has fully been documented in the recreation research. What we have seen, though, is that we know hunters are notoriously dissatisfied with their hunting experience. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about satisfaction as it relates to outdoor recreation, in particular hunting, and we try to understand those reasons why people are satisfied. And so that pressure or taking game is one of those variables. But we know it's more than just that, right? There's a lot of research that documents the variety of reasons why people are satisfied with their hunting experience. It's being outside, it's being in nature, it's being with their friends. Seeing game often creates a more satisfied hunter. And so I think that pressure piece, it would be interesting to untangle that a little bit. And then it would also be interesting to understand that and document that across males and females. So good question, no answer.
In your research, I had another participant ask the question about, does your research go into hunters, women hunters who are Black, Indigenous, people of color? Do you have any sense of where that lies?
Yeah, so there's actually, my research does not go into that, but there is a lot of folks who are looking at that. And so when we talk about this R3 movement, this recruitment, retention, reactivation, there's been a whole string of research on BIPOC, Indigenous, people of color, where we're trying to understand those patterns as well. And one thing we know is that when we think about kind of where people exist on the landscape, that we need to make hunting accessible to more urban areas. And so there is actually quite a movement with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to break down barriers and constraints for a lot of our different minority populations to understand how and why we can kind of change that. There's also great organizations in the state of Montana and across the West that are thinking about these issues, Afro Outdoors, and I'm blanking on a few of their names, but there's a bunch of them that are thinking about this in a more deep and meaningful way.
Okay. One of the things in recent history that I'm curious about, and another participant was interested in, do we have any numbers yet on hunting numbers during COVID?
I know. Yes. It's kind of crazy. It's actually really crazy. Montana, I wish I can find my notebook because I would find the numbers for you. FWP notes the increase in license sales as being very dramatic, like 20-30% increase in license sales. And so what we saw with COVID, and this is not just unique to hunting, it's unique to all of our outdoor activities, and we saw people pile into the outdoors at a greater rate than we've ever seen. You can look at National Park Service numbers, you can look at state park numbers, you can look at just anyone who just goes on who was on the North Hills during COVID, and you notice there is an increase of crowding. And so what we're seeing is actually this kind of hangover effect from COVID, where people are still hanging out outdoors. And for those of us who study it, we think that's a great thing. But what it does is it presents a whole new set of challenges around crowding and how do you manage people outdoors. And hunting is part of that conversation, right? And so we know those license sales increased. Places like Vermont that you saw was dramatically losing hunters, they saw an increase of all their hunting license sales. And so it was a combination of a bunch of stuff. It was people moving outside, it was people going to more rural areas. And so I don't know, I actually think it's kind of cool that COVID pushed us in the more positive direction with outdoors.
Yeah, well, I know it pushed me out. I was hiking a lot more the last couple of years than I did before that. Melissa asked the question, does the wild sustenance course interact or mesh at all with the Montana BOW programs that have been conducted at the Boone and Crockett clubs in the past years? If not, why not? I think you pointed out that, isn't that what you were doing?
Yeah, so we don't interact with BOW or becoming an outdoorswoman. And there's a real reason for that. BOW programs are really nested within the agency. And some of the work that Josh and I are really trying to do is do it differently than the agency. And so we wanted to start with the research. We wanted to start with these fundamentals that we have research, that we've experienced, that we know with college age students. And so we really focus on just our college students. And we actually put a call out to campus during advising and we say, hey, this class is happening in the fall. And it is impressive. We get students from all over campus, from a variety of different majors, from all different levels, from freshman to senior year. And it's kind of, and people with all different walks of life. I have had students in there who said, I hate guns and I can't even believe I'm here, but I'm here. And so we talk a lot about gun safety. We talk a lot about guns. We talk about the ethics behind them. And we challenge our students to really think about what's right for them. We don't get preachy. We try to give that, we make that open for them to figure out what their path is.
And another issue, and you talked, I think, just tangentially about it. Do you have any data or sense about women's attitude towards trophy hunting?
Yeah, this is a good one. I don't know what to say on this one. So I have an opinion. You will know I have a lot of opinions. I was recently listening to a podcast with Alex, my partner, and it was about trophy hunting. And it put me in this like spiral of Instagram and understanding trophy hunting. And I don't know really how I feel about it. I know there's women who trophy hunt, and I don't understand it enough to be able to form a good opinion about it beyond what I feel. And I will leave it at that, Jeff.
Well, no, I was curious about if the research has covered it, and you indicated that there are women who trophy hunt, and so I think that's a satisfactory answer.
Thank you.
From Jenny Chafin, what do you and other female hunters want to see from the outdoor gear and apparel industry to meaningfully support female hunters, both in terms of gear and industry support? What are you looking for besides pink camo?
Well, Jenny, I know your deep ties with the outdoor industry, so I'm happy to share with you. One of the things that we noticed, there's a tax for being a woman. And this is not a small thing. It happens across the industry. Women's clothing, women's gear, women's everything is just more expensive than men. And so one of the things is making gear affordable. And I think this about hunting in general. One of the largest constraints that we see is that people think hunting is too expensive to get into. And they are largely right. And so how do we think about gear differently? How do we think about making gear accessible for all people? And so I often, and so I'm going to come back to Jenny's point. I'm going to get on this soapbox. So I used to spend a lot of time working with inner city youth and taking them on backcountry wilderness adventures on the East Coast as an alternative to kind of going into some type of course mandated system. And so one of the things that we often taught there was you can do outdoor activities in a good pair of wool pants and a fleece. And so I often try to bring those principles into hunting, that you do not need to have fancy hunting gear. You can wear anything that's dark green. You can wear anything that kind of just blends in with the scenery. And so that's one thing I want to acknowledge, is that you don't need to get the fancy cool gear. But the industry is there, right? And we know that the industry is actually having some challenges right now in hunting, because they keep making bigger, better rifles, bows, gear, and they keep getting more and more expensive. But the hunting population isn't catching up with that, right? And so there's a kind of a challenge there. And I think for women's outdoor apparel, it's actually making genuine sizes and not just shrinking it down, making a variety of different styles as well, and not just one style. One of the examples I often give in Missoula is that I cannot find an blaze orange hunting vest in my size. I am a 5'8" woman who is like large in bones. I'm a healthy woman, and I still wear a little boy's hunting vest because I cannot find a vest that fits my frame. And so we just, even here in Missoula, with as many outdoor shops that we have, I just can't find blaze orange. And so it's a safety issue for me. And so we need the sizes, we need enough of the sizes, and we need a variety of the different price points as well.
Yeah, it sounds like Cabela's needs to have a visit from a customer. Because if the market's going to be the one that's going to solve that problem, and they have to know that there is a market. So I think you're right. One of our viewers, Lane, asks, what are some simple steps that us, or we as individuals passionate about hunting and conservation, can take to help recruit more people into hunting, such as women? I feel like it is hard to connect with women on this topic, being that he is a white man.
I know Lane. Hi, Lane. Great question. I actually think it's, I appreciate the one-on-one kind of approach to things. And I do wonder if we have greater efficiency and success by kind of connecting in with existing networks. And so this is where student clubs become a critical piece for me. The way we get more women into it is, let's take the club with a variety of people in it, and let's take them all out and do something. And so our clubs actually in the college do a lot of that work for us, which is pretty phenomenal. We're so lucky in the College of Forestry and Conservation to have these amazing student clubs who are thinking about this and are taking an inclusive, wide-angle view on it. How do you do it on a one-on-one basis? I think that's a really big, challenging activity. And I don't think I have a really good answer at this moment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, his second question is, what has been the most rewarding part of this work for you so far?
Question. I love hearing from women. I love hearing stories. I like sharing stories. I like learning. I love it when women share their successes with me, whatever that success looks like. I have students who will, and male and female, who will send me pictures of them in the field. They will tell me something cool that happened while they were outdoors. And so having those stories and conversations and narratives, it fills my bucket. It's like, it keeps me moving in a direction with this research. And so I think that's been the most fulfilling part. I talked about my student Ada and Madeline, who are both women hunters. I have other ones too, Hannah, who graduated, but they their passion when they started and their kind of drive and motivation is so impressive. I'm just, and I guess it motivates me to continue to research this topic and to continue to advocate for a more holistic understanding of how people engage with hunting.
On the subject of telling stories, a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, a local Missoula woman, Molly Bradford, took the stage to tell us something, and she related just a remarkable story about hunting. And she was out with her women friends hunting, and it was, I think it was one of the most amazing stories of the evening, highly personal, dramatic, and it was a very engaged. I don't think there was anybody in the audience that wasn't engaged with her story. So it's a I don't know if you saw that or heard it, but an amazing story.
That's great.
I think we've reached the end of the questions that we've gotten so far. I want to thank you. This was a very interesting. Oh, wait a minute. We just got more. And all right. Have there been any studies done to see how non-hunters feel about contributing to conservation, hikers and other users of the land, to support non-game wildlife in their habitat? The Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation has addressed this in their look at the economics of conservation. I am a hunter and concerned with how conservation will be funded in the future if funding declines. And that's Wayne.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. Great question. Because I think there's a lot going on with this right now. We have a couple of grad students here on campus who are trying to understand what's happening around hunting for conservation. There's this conversation comes up every year on the river, if you're in Missoula, and the tube hatch happens, and the conversation immediately goes to, well, anglers are paying for the conservation of the river. What are these tubers doing? They're just destroying it. And so do we put a fine on tubers? And so these conversations are happening. Where they move to, I'm not certain. I can look to kind of the recreation fee program across the United States. This is when the Forest Service started to charge a fee at recreation sites. And in the late 90s, people lost their mind and they're like, this is the worst idea. No one's ever going to visit a national forest again. And that just didn't happen, right? And so I have a feeling we get in recreation, we tend to get really upset about things. So one of the big ones right now is e-bikes. I can't walk through the state of Montana without somebody stopping me to ask my opinion about e-bikes. And I say it's like everything else. Everyone's gonna freak out. We're gonna develop policies, and then it's going to figure it. It'll work itself out. And so I think that's going to be the same with conservation funding. I think it's going to be slow, incremental steps. And we're going to figure out how do we pay for this differently? How do we reduce things? How do we change things? There's a lot of different challenges around conservation and license sales that we have to figure out that are good in some ways and bad in other ways. But I think we can do it as a society, I guess.
I like that. That would be my answer. I think we could figure it out. Alyssa asks, has there been research in how younger girls respond to being introduced to hunting at the same age that boys are, similarly compared to the efforts of exposing girls to STEM education at younger ages?
Yeah, Alyssa, that's a wonderful question. There is no answer. So we know it's a notorious challenge. It's just challenging to study youth in general, right? There's a lot of human subjects and around that. And so figuring out the right way to test that is a conundrum for me. Like, how do I understand? Do I look at boys and girls who hunt and understand those experiences? And so it becomes a challenge of who do I talk to? Like, who's my sample when I think about this? And so sometimes that's one of our biggest barriers in research is we don't know what our sample is to get at that question. And so my guess is that there's probably a lot of similarities to STEM education around that, women in science, women in engineering. And so I don't know, I don't have a good answer, but I think it's a really fascinating question.
Well, maybe you can save it for one of your future grad students.
That's right.
When they say, what should I research? Well, that is the last question that we got. So I want to thank you again for this lecture tonight. It's fascinating to me that the questions that you're taking up with at the university are being taken up with at the university. I know that as I was thinking about it, nearly 50 years ago, when I was at the university, there was a program called Round River, which was, I thought all those guys did is went camping and got high. But they were really getting into some of these meaty questions about wilderness, wildland, animals, how we relate. And they were the ones that introduced me to Aldo Leopold. So I guess they were doing something right. But I'm glad that you're doing this research. I'm glad that you're on the campus. I'm glad that you agreed to be part of our lecture series this year. It was just delightful to hear what you had to offer tonight.
Thank you so much, and thank you all. Yeah,
and so just to repeat, all of the lectures are going to be rebroadcast on MCAT. They're going to be appearing on the MCAT YouTube channel and on their online channel every Tuesday at 5:30 and every Thursday at 7 for the next 5 weeks. So if you've missed any of the lectures so far, you'll be able to see them in the weeks ahead, and you can be caught up that way. So on behalf of the Alumni Association Community Lecture Series Committee, thank you all for joining us tonight. We have one more lecture next week, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you all then. So good evening.